Now, growing up as a boy, David Attenborough was my hero, and one of my very favorite books of his is Adventures of a Young Naturalist. So in it, he details some of his expeditions, but one that particularly stuck with me was a journey to South America to go find the giant armadillo. For those who haven't seen a giant armadillo, I know we're going to see it in this talk coming up in a minute, but look it up. It's just the most spectacular and unique and incredible species. And today, we are joined by Arnaud Desbiez. His work has been featured by PBS, BBC, National Geographic, and more. And he brings this global expertise, having worked across South America and in Nepal, and for the last 19 years in Brazil, working to save giant anteaters and armadillos. Today, we're going to focus on the latter. And I'm so excited to bring him in to share his story and hopefully inspire you guys to take some great conservation action wherever you might be joining from around the world. So Arnaud, thank you so much for coming in today, and welcome to the program. Welcome to the BioFest.
Hi, Jesse. Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so great to have you here. I know we were testing screen share in the back. If you want to bring us in and dive into the talk, I'm excited to hear from you, and hopefully we get some great questions right after you're done.
Perfect. So let's dive in.
Fantastic. I love your backdrop, by the way. I'm becoming an aficionado of backgrounds in people's houses, and it's very elegant. I like the dream catchers.
Okay, here we are. So, hello, everybody. My name is Arnaud Desbiez, and I'm the founder of a small Brazilian NGO called the Wild Animal Conservation Institute. And tonight, I will be talking about giant armadillo conservation in Brazil through our Giant Armadillo Conservation Program. Now, I'm originally from France. I've lived half my life in the United States and France, and I had already been living for 8 years in Brazil, and I had never seen a giant armadillo. And this was a species that I always dreamed about seeing, just kind of like Jesse introduced in the book about David Attenborough. This is a very elusive, rare species that very few people get the chance to see. And so I was determined to try to, just get an image of one. And so 12 years ago, I set out in the field where I was living in the Pantanal and put some camera traps up. And this is when I got my first image of a giant armadillo. So this was in July 2010. And I got this big male giant armadillo leaving its burrow at the right at the cusp when the night was starting. And this picture really changed my life. I was absolutely shocked to see this species. Just the sheer size of it. Giant armadillos are 5 feet from the tip of their nose to the tip of the tails. They weigh about 80 pounds. And I just couldn't believe that this species existed. And, this picture changed my life. And when I got this picture, I decided to just dedicate myself to understanding and then conserving and trying to save this species. Giant armadillos are distributed throughout South America. They are found from Venezuela to northern Argentina, basically everything east of the Andes. They are the largest of the armadillos. They are, as I said, they can weigh about 80 pounds. They're about the size of a Labrador retriever. They're characterized by this big armor and these, on the third digit, these really large claws that are bigger than the claws of a polar bear. They can reach over 15 centimeters. And they use these big claws to rip open ants and termite mounds, which is what what they feed on. And they use their back paws to kind of, like us to scoop sand out. So, I started the project now 12 years ago in 2010 from that right image. And now we have programs in different areas of Brazil and even Argentina. We work in the Pantanal, Cerrado, Atlantic Forest, and the Argentinian Chaco. And I'm going to start focusing with our work in the Pantanal because that's really where we started. That's where that first image was taken. But it's also kind of like our laboratory. This is where we learned the basics about giant armadillo biology, ecology, health, genetics, and their interaction with the other animals. For those of you who don't know, the Brazilian Pantanal is located in the in the center of the South American continent. 95% of the Pantanal is privately owned and divided into these really large cattle ranches where traditional grazing is practiced. And this is, the Pantanal is actually one of the few is one of the few examples of the sustainable use of a tropical ecosystem. And until recently, wildlife was pretty well protected there. That's probably due to the extreme droughts, extreme flooding, which means that, besides cattle ranching, not much else can be done. Well, as I mentioned, I started by placing a few camera traps, and that's actually how we made our first discovery, which is that other species use giant armadillo burrows. Here we have a six-banded armadillo using a giant armadillo burrow, a southern tamanduá using a giant armadillo burrow, a agouti munching a seed in a giant armadillo burrow. And what we found is that giant armadillos are ecosystem engineers, and this means that they modify resources in the ecosystem, and the resource here is they provide these homes, these burrows, these deep burrows. They can be up as deep as 5 meters. They have this large mouth, about 45 centimeters, and basically the giant armadillo spends all day deep underground. They go out at night for a few hours, on average 5 hours, to forage on ants and termites, and then often enough they will dig a new burrow. And on average, they dig a new burrow every 2-3 days, and then they abandon these burrows. And these burrows are then used by lots of other species. We've documented over 70 species using giant armadillo burrows. And you can see this little agouti is munching a seed. It's 41 degrees Celsius outside, but inside the burrow, it's a cool 25 degrees Celsius. So giant armadillo burrows offer a refuge against temperature. Here you have a crab-eating fox, ocelot, tyra, lots of other species. Collar peccary, it's a refuge against extreme temperatures, but also a refuge against predators. And not only the mammals, but also reptiles, your tegu lizards, tortoise, lizards. And of course, it attracts the predators. So we have all this life happening around the giant armadillo burrow. Here's this red-legged Siriema looking to see if there's not a lizard or a snake that it can feed on. And it's not just the burrow, but also the sand mound, which provides food. There's lots of invertebrates, even amphibians, and animals go there to seek food or as a place to rest. So we were talking about David Attenborough here. We actually had a documentary made in 2017 about hotel armadillo, describing this process, which was narrated by giant armadillos. And so this is one of the fascinating facts about this species. Here's a species we knew almost nothing about, and yet they provide homes for other species. But of course, we had to capture giant armadillos, and up until now, in the past 12 years, we've captured 36 giant armadillos. And we placed telemetry devices on them and have been able to follow them and understand better about their ecology. They have exclusive home ranges that are 25 square kilometers. And just as an example, the largest terrestrial mammal we have here in Brazil, the lowland tapir, has a home range of 5 kilometers. So giant armadillos, 25 square kilometers, 5 times larger than a tapir home range. We've shown that they select forested habitats mostly, and that is especially important for reproduction. Females reproduce and have their pups in the forested areas, and the first few years of the pup's life are spent in the forested areas. So forested areas are key for giant armadillo survival. We also learned about their reproduction. Almost nothing was known about giant armadillo reproduction before this project started. And what we found is that their gestation period is 5 months. They have only one pup at a time, with the interbirth rate of 3 years. And giant armadillo mothers are very dedicated. But of course, we don't only do science and study the animals. We also try to mitigate threats and try to protect giant armadillos. In the Pantanal, the main threat we are trying to mitigate against is our fires. You might have heard that 2 years ago, in 2020, we had terrible fires throughout the Pantanal, where over a third of the biome was burnt to the ground. And we have documented that in the past 12 years, we have lost 3 giant armadillos due to fires. In a neighboring park in the Cerrado in Emas, 2 giant armadillos were also documented dead. So we built a community fire brigade where we have joined 10 ranches together, fundraised for materials to provide them with all the materials they need so that they can combat fires themselves. And so here we are with the fire brigade. This fire brigade was trained last year. In July this year, we're training another more. We're giving the opportunity to people who are already trained last year to be trained again, but we're also branching out, inviting more neighbors. And so we're really protecting a huge area, over 1,000 to 1,500 kilometers with these community fire brigades to prevent fires. And that's really important. In the Cerrado, the main threat we're focusing on is both habitat loss and a human wildlife conflict. Habitat loss, and we started since 2015 trying to model habitat distribution of giant terminals. And you can see all these little dots. These are the places where we visited micro watersheds, and the red ones is where giant terminals were not present. The blue ones is where giant terminals were present. And we use that to try to model habitat, the probability of occurrence of giant armadillos. And you can see that here, in dark brown, that's where giant armadillos can occur. And what is terrible is these results showed us that, and you can see here in green, fragments where giant armadillos, there's adequate habitat for giant armadillos. And what these results showed us are terrible. What they showed us is that the habitat is completely fragmented and isolated. And here we only have 69 fragments of more than 25 square kilometers that are adequate for giant armadillos in the Cerrado of Mato Grosso do Sul. Only one protected area that is more than 100 square kilometers, and only four fragments that are more than 100 square kilometers. And when I said 25 square kilometers, that's because that's the average home range of a giant armadillo. So only 69 fragments, more than 25 square kilometers of suitable habitat for giant armadillos in the Cerrado of Mato Grosso do Sul. And so the project we're trying to focus on now, and we just started this year, is creating corridors, working with local people to try to create private corridors to try to link these different islands of native habitat which support giant armadillos. Another threat that we're trying to work on is human wildlife conflict. You see beekeepers, they place their hives near the fragments where near these native fragments, right? They try to get the bees to use the flowers of the native Cerrado. Well, that's also where the giant armadillos live. And now the giant armadillos have learned to destroy beehives. And you can see in this video, here's a male giant armadillo, very interested in toppling the beehive. And what it will do is it will topple the beehive, rip it open, and eat the larvae. And so what we have created is now, we've created a manual guidelines to coexist with giant armadillos. And so there are lots of different methodologies that can be used to prevent these attacks. And the beekeepers that prevent the attacks and use that, they will gain a certification of giant armadillo friendly. And so you can see here's our first honey. You can see it has the certificate on it. And I have several jars here. You can see here is giant armadillo friendly honey. You can see we now have this for sale. There are about 200 beekeepers that live in the giant armadillo distribution area in the Cerrado Mato Grosso do Sul. We just started now certifying beekeepers. We already have 50 certified beekeepers, many more interested. And what we're excited is that this honey is now being purchased more expensive. So it has higher value. Giant armadillo honey, friendly honey, has more value. So that's a really exciting project that's being developed to try to save the last giant armadillos in the Cerrado and help beekeepers to coexist with them. In the Atlantic forest, the Atlantic forest is one of the most threatened biomes in South America. Less than 10% of the biome is left. We've surveyed several areas of the Atlantic forest, and we have found that only in the Parque Estadual do Rio Doce in Minas Gerais there are still giant armadillos, a viable population of giant armadillos left. And so we have now been working since 2020 in this park to try to save the last population of giant armadillos of the Atlantic forest. And this is a very critical situation. We believe there are at least 60 individuals left. We have a huge camera trap grid. Here's Lucas Barreto, who is coordinating the work there. We have several camera trap grids monitoring the population. We've been able to estimate the population. And now we're working the surrounding fragments to try to reconnect them with the park. And we're working hand in hand with the park to make giant armadillos, one of the ambassadors of the park, so that the park is not only preserved, but expanded. And that the different threats, we have several threats of encroachment. They want to open a road in the park and everything. So we're now working with other species conservation projects to try to prevent that from happening. So save this important habitat and save this last population of giant armadillos. Education outreach is something that is key to our work, and we collaborate with the FUBA, which is environmental education company. Andrea is the one who coordinates this work, and we have a specific action plan for education and communication. We work in over 200 schools in Mato Grosso do Sul. We work with lots of different types of local community. From as you can see, the Cerrado has a huge diversity. We work with lots of different communities, and of course, our state government. And here we are with the governor of our state discussing giant armadillo conservation. All our education, due to the pandemic, we've had to now bring all our education work online. And so, if you go onto our website, you can find more about our education work. And last but not least, I want to just introduce the team of ICAS, the Wild Animal Conservation Institute. We have 16 full-time staff. And everybody works extremely hard, and it's a very diverse group of biologists, veterinarians, social scientists, public relations communicators, educators, public policy specialists. And so this diverse group forms our NGO. And I want to point out that 9 members of our staff are now sponsored by zoos, and that is really key. I myself am sponsored by the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, which owns the Edinburgh Zoo and Highland Wildlife Park. And so zoos are a huge part or a huge collaborative and important part of our work. And last but not least, I cannot help but mention that Gabriel Masucato, which is who coordinates the work in the Pantanal and is one of our biologists. He just won the Future for Nature Award just 2 weeks ago. And he was in Holland receiving this wonderful award, and he's already back now into the field. And here, we have our full-time staff, but we also have volunteers, students, and lots of different collaborators, 10 students, and about 40 different collaborators and institutions that we work with. And here are the donors that work, lots of different zoos, especially from North America and Europe, reminding you that there are no giant armadillos in captivity in North America or Europe, and yet these zoos fund our project, and we are very, very, very grateful to them. So, this has been the last 12 years of my life have been dedicated to giant armadillo conservation. It all started with this one picture. It's been a crazy adventure. It has taken me through different biomes of Brazil, in all kinds of situations, and this is just an amazing species that, even today when I see a giant armadillo, which is rare, which when we capture them, it's still such a huge impactful event. These are dinosaur-like creatures. They're huge, and even though they look so big and strong, they're actually such a fragile species that really need our protection. Remember, this is an animal that has a low population growth rate. We discovered, I forgot to mention, that they reach sexual maturity only when they're 7 to 9 years of age. Then they only have 1 pup every 3 years. And just if you look at compared to the 9-banded armadillo, which is the armadillo most people are familiar with, they have 4 pups every year. So in 3 years, the giant armadillo has 1 pup. The 9-banded armadillo has 12. The nine-banded reaches sexual maturity at 1.5, 2 years. This species 7 to 9 years. So these are really fragile species that, habitat loss, fires, roadkill, any removal of any individual has a huge impact on this species and can lead to local extinctions. Because this is a species that occurs at low density, that is extremely rare, that spends all day underground and only comes out at night. People don't even know it exists. And when it goes extinct locally, people don't even know it goes locally extinct. And that's what I find really heartbreaking with this species. It can disappear without anybody noticing. So hopefully we are trying, my team and I are working as hard as we can to give a future to this important species, which also gives homes to other animals and plays a key role in the ecosystem. So thank you so much. And if you are interested in learning more about our work, you can please get into our social media. We have or get directly in touch with me. I left my email right here. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, we're LinkedIn, YouTube. We have We have media on all of those. Thank you so much.
Arnaud, what a spectacular presentation. And I think this is a theme that we're going to keep coming back to throughout the entire Biodiversity Festival, is that a lot of these charismatic and really amazing animals are facing a wide array of threats. It's not usually just one thing, it's a lot of different things that impact them. But I go back to the beginning of your talk and your sheer joy and passion seeing the baby, which I've never seen a baby in any footage I've ever seen in my life. What a spectacular creature. And I think that's a testament to you, and has led to this amazing recognition with the team around you and the amount of support that you've gotten from zoos around the world. So kudos to you for all of that. It's really quite wonderful and well deserved. You talked about building corridors and working with local community stakeholders to sort of make sure that there's passages that these amazing creatures can go through. Now, corridor development is a really popular conservation idea around the world. How are you finding that? Are people receptive to that idea? Do they leave the land? Do you have to fight with people to sort of convince them of the worth of this, or how's it going?
No, this is all volunteer, and so we're this is kind of the work is starting this year. We're working with different NGOs, and especially a new cellulose company who has made it its mission to reforest several areas. So thanks to this, this private company, it's really helping us. And so it's a question of finding the maps, linking the right things, and we're doing all the monitoring and try to show them what are the best places to do that.
Yeah. I'm really happy that you mentioned that. We talk a lot about government support for a lot of programs around the world, and even things like zoos, where you sort of expect that their basis is education and conservation. But when private industry gets involved in a serious way, that's a really spectacular thing, and I think it can lead to a lot of great funding for programs like this. So kudos to you. With the bees again, another thing that we've seen with elephant conservation, we've seen around the world. Yes, I love your honey. I made you full screen when you were sharing that, so we'll have to make sure people have that link if they're keen to know. Here, I'll make you. We can see it a little bit closer for everybody. My toast is not the same without honey, and nor is my cereal, so I'll have to buy from you guys from now on. Now, you talked about these armadillo-proof things. There was a sort of a mock-up of it. How do you make something proof to a powerful creature with gigantic claws? What does that look like?
So one of the best solutions to prevent giant armadillo predation is to raise the hives up 1.30 meters.
Okay.
That means, because as you saw in the footage, what they often do is they stand on their hind feet, they use their tail as a tripod, and they'll knock over the hive with their head. And so if the hives are higher up, that prevents them from doing that. However, then it's much harder for the beekeeper to work the hive. So if he has permanent hives, he can use fencing, both electric or just wire mesh. But sometimes it's important to dig underneath, so to prevent them from digging. And right now we're testing this new methodology where you actually have the hives up exactly 70 centimeters, which means it's a little bit high. It's too high for the animal to push it over, but it's too low for him to raise on its hind legs. And so that's something we're testing.
Wow.
And so we're looking at these different methodologies because giant armadillo do cause a lot of damage in our state. But in general, beekeepers are really great stakeholders in the sense that they are people that are usually love nature. They get their honey from nature, and so they're very sensitive to that cause, and so that has been working really well. And the good thing is now we're able to purchase this. This honey is now worth more. The factory that purchased the giant armadillo funding that has a certificate is paying a little bit above market price, and so that's also another incentive. So we worked with a North American NGO called the Wildlife. What is it? It's Wildlife Friendly Network Enterprises.
Okay.
They helped us to develop the norms. We have a contract, a 3-year contract with the beekeepers, and includes not just giant armadillo friendly, but practice no deforestation, careful fire management, no child labor. It's all these other things, so that it's really to international standards.
Yeah. Well, I love this because, I mean, what I find in a lot of the education work we do with conservation groups is that people want to be able to buy products that help support local wildlife. It's very difficult to do that research on their own. And so any organization that partners with a group that can vet that and make sure that it's at the highest standard for people, for wildlife, for the habitat, it really goes a long way to helping people make those informed decisions. So what a spectacular program. For you've been active in media, you have this team, you partner with zoos, you get this education word out there. How effective do you find that in terms of supporting your effort? Not just you go to these community stakeholders, you talk to them, you engage them in the work that you're doing. When some of your work gets featured on PBS or BBC or something like Hotel Armadillo, do you see that feedback into your work? Do you see more interest, more people reaching out? How does that play out?
Well, it works well when it's local media. That works really well. The BBC and PBS was not very helpful to us because when you work with these broadcasters, for it to be broadcasted in Brazil, Brazilian television would have to purchase the rights, and so it was never broadcasted in Brazil. So, which is something we didn't understand. We were really excited when the BBC and PBS wanted to film our work.
Yeah.
We had no idea that wouldn't help our cause here in Brazil. That's been really disappointing.
Yeah.
Meeting David Attenborough and having him, talk about our project, that was the highlight, of course.
Yeah. I'm happy for you and jealous at the same time. It's a spectacular opportunity. But I did bring up, for anyone who does want to check out the PBS Series 2, Hotel Armadillo. Looks fantastic. I had this up, and it's a gorgeous trailer if people want to check it out online. And you had the most intensive of all our final slides for any of our speakers so far, with all these ways people can get in touch. But iGuessConservation.org.br is a really fantastic tool. GiantArmadillo.org. You have all the sites. You have more sites and ways of contacting you than I think any 10 people. So I hope our viewers today, live and after the fact, take the opportunity to do so. Arnaud, I'm inspired. I am so excited. I've been waiting for this program ever since I heard I was getting the chance to host it. So thank you for sharing your passion.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Thank you so much for having me, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Such a fun night. I'm loving all the talks. I'm really enjoying watching all of them. It's
Stick around. We've got many more to come. I think we got like 7 more before we wrap up the night.
Absolutely. I look forward to seeing and watching them. This is great. Thank you so much.